طيب شباب، يعطيكم العافية والصوم مبارك. أول شيء اليوم ندفي أبونا الأبونا عفوا الدكتور دانيال هينشو ومدامته راح يحكوا لنا عن قديس هو على طريق القداسة أو على طريق إعلان القداسة، اللي هو أبونا رومان براغا، اللي هو من مولدوفا، بس آخر حياته قضاها بالغرب بالبرازيل وآخرته بالولايات المتحدة. فهن رح يحكوا لنا عنه شوي، عن حياته وعن أعماله، وآخر شيء رح يكون عنا فترة إذا حدا بيحب يسأل شيء. هلا الحديث بشكل أساسي بيكون بالإنجليزي، إذا حدا استصعب أو حدا ما فهم في شيء بيسأل أبونا الحارس أو بيسألوني بنشوف كيف نظبط. بتمنى نستمع ونحاول نستفيد قد ما بنقدر. أوكي. طبعا أبونا دكتور دانيال هو دكتور جراح يعني دكتور، غير أنه هو مختص بما يسمى نهاية الحياة، صعوبة نهاية الحياة، الاحتضار، يعني مساعدة الناس أنهم يجتازوا هالمرحلة كتير صعبة بسلام. فبعتقد كمان فينا نستفيد من خبرته.
Okay, so we're very excited to talk to you about this holy man to start out the Lenten retreat, who we were blessed to have as our spiritual father in Michigan. And he is now in the process of canonization by the Orthodox Church in America. I will start out by telling you a little bit about who he is, and then Dan will take the latter part, telling you about some of his spiritual teachings that we hope will be a blessing and enrichment to you on your Lenten journey. Does everyone understand? It's okay? Okay. So our Archbishop in Michigan is already starting to refer to him as our Holy Father Roman Braga of the Great Lakes. Michigan is surrounded by the Great Lakes, and that's where he spent a big portion of his life. Mother Gabriella, our abbess at the Holy Dormition Monastery, asked Dan to write his biography. They had already done one book together on meditations of healing with iconography of healing touch by Christ that were written at the monastery there. So we were honored that she trusted in us. She knew we were a team. I do the behind the scenes work and the editing. And we shared with Father Bassam that we were starting this project. He said, well, my son is doing portraits of holy figures, and he would like to do a portrait. What happened? He would like to do a portrait of Father Roman. He was only 16 at the time, and we thought, well, okay, not sure how this is going to turn out. But he was very inspired when we showed Mother the portrait. She was in tears. He was able to capture something that even the photo I had sent him didn't have in it. So we were very blessed to have him as part of this project, and it ended up on the front cover of the book. Father Roman was born in Bessarabia, which is modern-day Moldova, but at the time it was part of Romania. He was born in 1922, the youngest child in a family of 7 children. Very pious people. The mother had wanted to be a nun, but she felt it was God's will that she marry, and she had this family of very holy children, 3 of whom ended up becoming monastics. He was closest to his youngest sister, Versavia, who at the young age of 10 went to the monastery. They have a tradition there of going very young to monasteries and joining family members. Her maternal aunt was already at the Romanian monastery of Varatek. So she eventually became Mother Benedicta. They were very close in age and in their spiritual formation. Eventually, Father Roman's mother was able to join him at join the daughter at the monastery, and died there as a schema nun. Most of his education was done at seminaries. These were ecclesiastical schools situated in monasteries often. And he was always impressed with the simple monks. He talked a lot about simple monks. He was this very intellectual man who pursued education, but also was most impressed by the profound faith of the very simple monks. And he kept coming back to that theme in his teaching. He grew up during a time of extreme political turmoil in Romania. The government was a fascist group. There was a strong movement called the Legionnaires. Some of it was based in the churches and could be very strengthening of faith, but parts of it were very extreme and even violent. There were pogroms associated. And so it remains very controversial, those people who were associated with the Legionnaire movement. Father Roman was never an actual member of the Legionnaires, but many of his friends were, so he was guilty by association. During World War II, the Romanians allied with the Nazis initially, and it wasn't until 1944 when King Michael tried to change sides, chose the communists as what he thought the lesser of two evils, but ended up being quite evil in itself, as Father Roman found out. So Father Roman was drafted into the military, but he was so thankful that he was never forced to go into combat. And actually, during his time in the military, it was productive for him. He was allowed to finish school. He finished his bachelor's, and he even started a PhD program under Dimitri Staniloae, now Saint Staniloae. And then also during that time, it was extremely rich spiritually for him. He was, along with Father Staniloae and others, part of the Burning Bush Christian renewal movement, meeting with a large group of theologians and intellectuals, and some bright students were invited. And that was meeting focused on the prayer of the heart. He got in trouble with a friend of his because that year, May Day celebrations that the communists loved were actually falling on Holy Saturday. He and his friend made flyers and distributed them, and were a little too visible to the communists, saying you should be going to church, not to May Day celebrations. So he was arrested. That was his first arrest, and it was brutal. He was sent to the torture prison at Pitești, which not only did physical torture, but psychological, social, trying to tell them their mothers were prostitutes and all kinds of horrible things, and they hated them, and also spiritual torture, trying to compromise them in whatever way and get them to brutalize their peers. Finally, news of this horrible place leaked to the West. They killed a few of their guys to try to cover it up, shut down the program, and sent them out to the Danube Delta, which was also known as the graveyard of the bourgeoisie. So people were sent there to be worked to death. But after the horrors of Pitești, he found many blessings in it. And one of the biggest blessings was that he met Father Julia. Again, he was a simple monk, and he was delighted to learn from him of his profound faith, and he helped him realize his vocation as a monk. So when he was finally released from 1953 to 58, he sought ordination and tonsure as a monk. And during that 5 years he was out, it was certainly better than prison, but it wasn't calm in any way. He was repeatedly taken in for interrogations and getting roughed up during that time. They clearly had their eye on him, and he was again arrested in 1958 with a large number of their group from the Burning Bush movement. So ironically, Father Screama, whom some of you know from his time here in this country, very innocently gave an interview in France about this wonderful renewal movement that had gone on in Romania. Well, the communists read about it, and they skewed things, as they usually did, and turned it into a big violent conspiracy against the state, and had this show trial that was ridiculous. And then they were all sent largely to the Delta again. This time it's always brutal out there with not enough food, but there were also some hidden blessings in that many of them were put together. And there's even a chapter of the book called Prison as Monastery. In some ways, he saw this as his monastic experience. In the evenings after they worked, they'd come back together in the barracks and have services and enrich each other and grow. So by 1964, there was a general amnesty, and he was released with most of the rest of them. Many of those men that he was there with in the Burning Bush movement and the Delta have just been canonized by the Romanian church this past year as saints. He when he got out, was ordained as a priest, had a hard time finding someone who would let him work, because they were all afraid of people who'd been tainted by being in the prisons. But finally, he was sent to some parishes in the far north. He was too successful for the tastes of the communists. They one time came at night and forcibly moved him to another parish. But he was again very successful in his spiritual efforts with his church, and the patriarch knew they were going to be killing him if he stayed much longer, and was willing. And was arrested again. So is a sign. So Patriarch Justinian was also known as the Red Patriarch. Some people felt that he worked with the communists too much. They were actually, the church was under the Ministry of the Interior. So the communists had their finger in everything. But Father Roman said he did what he could do, and he kept the churches open. Unlike in Russia, the churches of Romania remained open, and he had to make some compromises, which was very difficult. Father Roman said that's a different kind of suffering, but it is definitely suffering. So he's made an archimandrite. He was sent to Brazil to get him out of the country. It was a 1-year visa. And after that 1 year, the Romanians were insisting he come back, but he knew it would be to his death. And he was saved by the Antiochians, actually. Archbishop Ignatios in Sao Paulo took him under his protection, and he served as an Antiochian priest there in Brazil for 3 more years before he was brought to the United States, to our great blessing as a nation, in 1972 under the somewhat controversial Archbishop Valerian. It was a Romanian branch of the church that wasn't under the Patriarch of Romania any longer, which was still very much controlled by the communists. So this was another branch that went under the Orthodox Church in America. He served in various capacities for the church until 1983, when he joined the Transfiguration Monastery in Pennsylvania as their full-time priest. Now, by that time, this very interesting group of nuns had been forming, started by Princess Ileana of Romania, who became Mother Alexandra at the Monastery of the Veil in Bussy, France. She wasn't used to running a monastery, and Father Roman helped initiate his sister, coming over from Romania to help, and she became the abbess. So Mother Benedicta, his sister, became the abbess there, and they were blessed to work together from 1983 until she left in 1987 to establish our monastery in Michigan. He remained 2 more years to make sure they were stable, and then he moved to our monastery in 1989. Here are the 2 monasteries. The top one is the Dormition of the Theotokos Monastery in Michigan. The bottom is the Transfiguration Monastery in Elwood City, Pennsylvania. As far as our connection with him, we were intermittent pilgrims to the monastery after we became Orthodox, and were chrismated in 1995. By the way, our very dear friends, Lebanese friends, were the ones that brought us to the church. Our godmother is Saliba from Mount Lebanon, Shreen area, and her husband, Gregory Dalek, was my colleague. When Father Roman was diagnosed with cancer, widely spread cancer in 2013, we were asked to be of more help in his care, and Dan worked as his palliative care doctor along with an official team that came. And we met with him every Sunday after liturgy for the last 2 years of his life. He died then April 29 of 2015 and is buried there at our monastery. This is a map that's hard to read, but Romania there on the left is a very small country. All of those words and dots are prison camps. The whole country was a virtual prison camp. Pitești was sort of near the bottom there. And then the enlargement on the right is the Danube Delta, where the Danube River is sort of a marshy area. They wanted to make a big canal, and that's where so many people died. On the left, yep, all the dots. So Dan's going to take over and talk to you about some of his important spiritual teachings.
I might mention too that those most of those prisons were there before the communists. So the government of Romania, between World War I and World War II, they had their own Siguranța was the name for their police force. They had secret police. It was not as oppressive as the communists, but they were still very oppressive in different ways. And so some of the people who were imprisoned before the communists came over the political issues, when the communists took over, they said, "Oh, you're already a criminal. We'll just keep you in prison." And so there, you may have heard of, I know it's been translated into Arabic, the story of Valeriu Gafencu, the saint of the prisons. And he's an example. He was arrested by the, Father Arsenia is a Russian, I think. Yeah, but Valeriu Gafencu was Romanian and but was involved with the legionaries, but was completely purified in prison. He had been political, but then repented of that. I just a couple comments about, or these are quotations mostly, I'm going to have up here from Father Roman about his experience in prison. The painting on the right is sort of an attempt by a Romanian painter, an iconographer actually, to depict some of the horrors of Pitești. But if you read about Romania and its communist time, the history, the Romanian historians refer to the Pitești phenomenon. And what Father Roman, after his first imprisonment, he came out of this attempt to re-educate. They wanted to create a new man. So we talk about St. Paul's, the Christian new man. Well, the communists are Christianity without God. I mean, they're the ultimate heresy, and they wanted to create this sense of a communist new man, and it was through re-education. But that re-education was a nice word for basically they would brainwash, torture, use drugs and violence to do this. But when Father Roman or young Roman Braga came out of prison, and the first thing he wanted to do was to become a monk, and then he was tonsured in Iași, which is in the north, and then a few days later he was made a hierodeacon. But he recognized that the whole country had become, and that's what the Pitești phenomenon is. It's referring to making the whole country a prison. So so in this first quote, when he was in prison, and he had, some of his most intimate friends would become his torturers, and they were trying to make him a torturer. He made this comment about this experience. He said, "Man doesn't know who he is. Man has an abysmal region, a deep, dark region. The rational component is only a small part. I saw saints become criminals, and those without spiritual formation become saints." And this is of course, the journey that we're on in Great Lent is kind of exploring our own situation. And then he made another quote. This figure, Țurcanu, was a young would-be lawyer who gave up his Orthodox Christianity and became an aggressive communist, and he developed this whole program. But he was eventually sacrificed when it got out that this was going on in the outside world. He thought it up or somehow, and he got out of control. He was completely under the pay. He was trained in the Soviet Union, sent back to Romania, and started this. But he was personally torturing Father Roman at this one moment. And he said, "One day in Pitești, in this terrible prison, Țurcanu, who had pulled one of my teeth, was now trying to forcibly open my mouth with an iron chisel to make me blaspheme against God. While I was clenching my teeth in resistance, he said, 'I'm not interested in your beliefs. You can remain the way your mother made you. I only want to compromise you.' And that was the whole idea of the Pitesh phenomenon, was to make everybody, every citizen at some level, an informer. You would report on your neighbor. A very dear friend of mine who was a medical student at the time of the revolution in 1989, she said that if you were as a student at the university, if you were in a group of 6 people or more, you knew that someone was going to be an informer. It was an expectation. So this, and interestingly, I didn't have the rest of the story here, but he actually resisted, and he said it was a miracle. He still didn't know years later how he was able to avoid blaspheming, that God protected him in that moment. So the other thing is, Father Roman had a lot of careful reflection about ideologies, about the danger of ideologies. And he said this about the communists. He said, the communists are capable of anything. Sometimes they came at night and took some of us, and even to this day, we do not know what happened to these people. Only recently have the common graves been discovered, because man as a person for them did not mean anything. They used to take every 4th man, and then they would just disappear in the prisons. Communism is an idea, and for this abstract idea, they killed the real thing, people. This is very interesting, because they say that communism brings happiness to people, but they killed people for this idea. They are not realistic, but idealistic. And this is, I think, the most interesting and important thing he says here. To me, we Christians are more realistic than they are. We're actually interested in persons. So Jane and I had the privilege at one point, about 5 years before he died, of sitting down and interviewing Father Roman about his thoughts about suffering. And these are some of the things he shared with us. But he said, if you do not suffer, you do not understand anything. We don't like to suffer. And we're even afraid of the word death. But he said that this is at the very center of our lives, especially as Christians. And then he spoke about the communist period and his own experience, but the effect on the Romanian people. He said this suffering was a blessing. We couldn't understand a lot of things without this persecution. This suffering was for the redemption of the whole nation, which I think is an extraordinary thing. So in the West, we think about our individual pain, our individual needs, but he was always thinking of his suffering being connected to the suffering of others and of his people, and this sense of communion in suffering, the fellowship of suffering, the koinonia of suffering that St. Paul talks about. He lived it, and then he also said, "You forgive only when you suffer." And then I'll just say briefly, he had nephews who were told by his parent or by his brother, don't talk about what we're doing at home, because at school the teachers would ask, "Are you praying? Do you have icons?" So they wanted the children to report on their parents, to inform on them, and he said this is a form of suffering. So you had to, whether you were a child in school or you were a bishop serving the church, you had 2 lives. You had the inner life that you had internally, and then you had this outer life that was based on lies so that you could protect the inner life. And so this is a great form of suffering. And this is a picture of the Red Patriarch, of Patriarch Justinian, who I think Father Roman felt he was very much maligned, and that he didn't deserve that kind of absolutely negative reputation. And this is what he says about the church. He said, "I'm not comfortable with the idea that if the hierarchy is sinful, the church no longer exists. I do not dare to say that if there is a bishop with personal sins, the Spirit of God is no longer with him. Because the Holy Spirit always works for the salvation of all people, regardless of the worthiness of those who officiate at the holy sacraments. Many priests are not worthy, but the Holy Spirit does not come and go in relation to our worthiness or our unworthiness. The Holy Spirit is the life of the church, even if some members of the church are sick or wounded by sin. And I think this is a very comforting thing for all of us. I mean, this is the vocation that you have to serve in the church is an awesome, awesome kind of responsibility. And all of us, are struggle. He was called the red because the red is the color of the the Bolsheviks, and I don't think he intentionally was ever involved in, killing people or sending them to their death. Yeah, no, the red is referring. No, he couldn't prevent some kinds of things. People were sent to prison and he didn't have an ability to necessarily prevent it, but he wasn't actively engaged. No, there were hierarchs. We don't have time probably to talk about Archbishop Valerian, but who was in the United States, who had been involved at least in inciting violence in Romania when he was young. But he said that his personal testimony was he didn't kill anyone himself, but he was certainly giving speeches. This was the legionary movement, was a fascist movement that was anti-Semitic. So I think this is one of the most extraordinary things that Father Roman said. When you suffer a little, you become hateful and seek revenge. When you suffer a lot, you forgive everything. So Father John Conkle, who is the priest, the last priest to be trained by Father Roman before he died, actually witnessed in the prayers of the proscomedia, when Father Roman was still able physically to do the prayers, he would remember by name and pray for his torturers. Because they were all baptized Orthodox Christians, but these are the people who tortured him in prison, and he loved them. He completely forgave them. Now he has this, with all of this, he grew up in this environment, it's hard not for that to rub off on you. But he said that this is the danger. He wanted to speak of this Christian nationalism. And of course, this is a problem now in my country. I have always feared the temptation of the Antichrist hidden in an uncontrolled nationalism. I never cared for the idea that we are better than other nations in the world, and we are privileged and favored by God in a special way. Or we Romanians, so he's thinking of himself as a Romanian, have a special role those other nations do not have, and the salvation of the world will come from us. All these exaltations kill every trace of spirituality. This idea is a diabolical trap. So it's, let's see, did I miss one? No, I guess not. Oh yeah, I wanted to share this too. I'm sorry, this is the second piece of this. So one of the things that was extraordinary about Jane and I when we were working on this book, Father Roman never wrote very much, but what he did write, he wrote very well, but he did not like to write. And we were worried about, can we find enough resources to really get an understanding of who he was in all of his complexity. But at every stage of the writing, something would come up. And the communist, the Securitate, these are the secret police of the communist regime, their files were opened. And we were able to get translations of his interrogations between his two imprisonments. And after his first imprisonment, they took him in. Now, sometimes they just would make things up. I mean, really crazy things, not even possibly true. But this is actually sounding like Father Roman's voice. And sometimes the interrogators had great respect for these prisoners. This also happened, for example, with Father Arsenia Papachok, who was another colleague and friend of Father Roman's. So anyway, he was taken in and interrogated, and they asked him about an intellectual, Ernest Bernea, who was at that time, a famous Romanian intellectual, but he was a fascist. So all of the intellectuals, typically in Romania, between World War I and World War II, were right-wing, which is unusual, but they were the kind of legionary intellectuals. And they wanted to know what were you talking about with this man? Because they were both prisoners in the Danube Delta, and they had informers in the prisons. And then he said, and this is what Father Roman said, speaking about this very well-known intellectual. He confirmed to me that between Christian morality and political activity, there are these contradictions that cannot be eliminated. Thus, you either lead a Christian life that is in conformity with the principles of Christian morality, or you engage in political activity. Those were nothing more than the conclusions that I had personally reached. So his conclusion, and this is the point I wanted to emphasize here, was that Christian politics was not possible. We talk about this sometimes in my country right now. There are some people who say, well, we just need to make everybody religious again, and everything will be better. But it's, of course, the question is, how religious were we before? I mean, are we capable of really repenting? So, now when Father Roman came to the United States, he was very insightful within 3 years of his coming. So by 1975, he was able to already kind of understand something of the nature of what it is, or what it makes the Western mind and especially Americans. And he, this is a little bit later, he was speaking at St. Vladimir's Theological Seminary at one point. There's a picture of him there. But he said something very startling, which of course Americans, what is he saying? Lord, we pray especially, so this is his prayer for America, especially that among these children who are intelligent and athletic, yet at the same time gullible and naive, some mystics or fools for Christ will someday emerge, those who will shatter all of Satan's temples, opening wide the gates of the hearts of all men to an encounter with Jesus Christ, because in this century of material overindulgence, America needs more fasting and prayer. She needs genuine saints who could revolutionize the entire universe toward new dimensions. So when the interrogators would take him in, frequently between his two imprisonments, they would accuse him, say, you're trying to destroy the communist state. And he didn't deny it. He said, my war with you is spiritual. It's not, I'm not going to use bombs but yes, I have a spiritual war with you. Okay. Another thing that I think was just very insightful here, because I wanted to share this with you, because this describes who both of us, when we became Orthodox. We came out of a Protestant background, and he saw and understood Protestants, American religious, Western Christians very well. He said, Protestants are not simple people as we are used to. The seed of faith does not go directly into their hearts without first passing through their minds. They search through documents, compare dates, establish authenticity, learn by heart scriptural texts, intersperse their speech with quotations. They see that the Holy Liturgy is something other than what they are using in the churches, and they want what happened? We're not in the true church. Let us search for the church. This is how they find orthodoxy. This is exactly what happened to me. I mean, I was a teenager, and I said, I can't possibly believe in this church I know that it started in the 1800s. I mean, it was It didn't make any sense to me. So today, for them, orthodoxy is simply a system of theology, but tomorrow it will become a mode of spiritual life. So we're having the difficulty, it's still up in our head, and it needs to come into our hearts. Now, this is a long quote, and I just want to highlight certain things because this speaks to his time when Father Roman was in solitary confinement. He had almost, I think, a complete year or close to a year in solitary confinement early in his imprisonment. And so he had been going to the group meetings of the Burning Bush, with the intellectuals. They would discuss the Jesus prayer. And he said that he didn't really begin to practice the Jesus prayer in reality and authentically until he was in prison. He said either he was going to go crazy or have to go inside. He talked about the inner universe. He said, I had some ideas about prayer because I came from the Burning Bush movement, but it was mostly theory. And then he discovered how beautiful the interior life was. And then he would say this to us frequently, not just in this writing where he was being interviewed, but he would tell me, he said, because I was teaching at a university, he said, it's not an exaggeration to say that in freedom, we become slaves of the books. We do not have time even to know who we are because we are made out of quotations. He said all of the things that he had learned, in theological academies and so forth when he was a student, they all came back to him. He didn't have any books, nothing. It was all, but it was there. The Holy Spirit brought it back to him in prison. But then when he was out of prison, again, later, the books were there. And he says the whole spiritual journey was different. And he didn't want to be back in prison being tortured, but he missed, there was something where God was very close to him during his suffering. So he had some things to say about the secularism, and these are just as, he may have said these almost 50 years ago, but these are still relevant today. What is lacking in modern man is the sense of holiness, sacredness, not information which you can take from any simple catechism book. God is not an intellectual acquisition. The greatest temptation, so this was specifically, now he's speaking for the priests. The greatest temptation facing the priest, a temptation that puts in danger the essence of orthodoxy itself, is that we are forced by secularism to introduce strange things and innovations just to keep people in church. And this is afflicting us in the Orthodox Church. I mean, there are intellectual strands, and it's coming from our universities, from the intellectual side, sadly. Young Orthodox priests are born, brought up, and educated in this social environment. I was talking about the West, and specifically America, where the schools and other educational institutions proclaim ex cathedra truths, which are in flagrant contradiction with the principles, dogmas, and lifestyle of Orthodox Christians. I mean, there are things now, I'm retired, I'm an emeritus professor at my university, but there are things that I would not be able to publicly say even in my retirement without people attacking me, because the universities are becoming less and less places of real dialogue. Everyone is basically being indoctrinated in a particular way of thinking. As human beings, priests themselves are immersed in contemporary history. They are part of it. They themselves are subject to temptations and sins and compromises and accommodations with the spirit of the world. I mean, this is the thing why we, especially I think as a layperson, we need to be praying for you as you work as clergy. And of course, if you have one of these, you can't be protected here, even in Lebanon. It's everywhere. I mean, the secular. So Father Roman said something that is, I think, an interesting thing for you to think about. He said, let us not be afraid that the ethnical groups in this country, so he's talking about, in the United States, there are many different people who came from Orthodox countries as immigrants. And then there are converts like Jane and me, And how does this all work out to form eventually an organic or Orthodox church in America? You know, one that shares all of these qualities and all of the great benefits that we have from the historic Orthodox churches. And he wanted to just say that sometimes people are afraid of the assimilation. He said we should not be afraid of this. This is a divine law. We cannot either force it or stop it. If we impede the adaptation of the Orthodox Church in this country, imposing our language or cultural background, we are not working according to the will of God. I'm sorry that for nearly 200 years, we have strived to keep our ethnical traditions in this country. And for the same period of time, we have filled the non-Orthodox churches with our children. And that's true. I mean, the second generation, third generation, they don't remember their parents' language. And so then they either don't go to church or they go to maybe a Protestant church or something where they now know the language. And this is, so a lot of the Orthodox churches were dying not up until recently. There's been kind of a resurgence now in interest in Orthodoxy, thank God. And then he says this, and this is something for all of us to kind of contemplate. Don't you think that it is time to be deeply convinced of the necessity of an American Orthodox Church? Now, the question is, how do we get there? He said that 50 years ago. Okay. This is Father Roman with Archbishop Nathaniel, who is of the Romanian Orthodox Episcopate. Eastern European Orthodoxy can contribute to the formation of American Orthodoxy. This is Father Roman speaking, but it will never be the same. I believe that God has a plan for America, a new form of Orthodoxy. This does not mean that it will not be authentic, but it has to be American. So, you know, so whether it was coming from Russia or Romania, or Bulgaria, or it's going to have a different American quality about it. So he had some interesting things also to say about monasticism. The woman on the left who's sitting, that's Mother Alexandra, the former Princess Ileana. And then to the right is Mother Benedicta. And this is at Elwood City, the Holy Transfiguration Monastery. So he said the goal of monasteries today is not flight from the world, but a transfiguration of society. So there's this dialogue going on. Each one of us has something monastic in ourselves. When Jesus said, you must take up your cross and follow me, he meant that for all of us, these expressions in the gospel are not just for monks. Monks are children with beards. There was a young man once that came to see him at the monastery and he said, I think I want to become a monk. And Father Roman smiled and he said, well, what's keeping, get started, go home and start praying, start repenting. But the young man, I think, wanted to immediately put on a cassock and sort of the outward part of the monk. He said that it's the inward part that you have to start with. He also said monks are called to invite people to theosis, to divinization, because we all have to be divinized. I think the expansion of Orthodox monasticism in America is good because it will change the perspective of our knowledge. In America today, we know things outside of ourselves. We only know of God from books, but the real God is a personal experience. So this is a really difficult thing for us coming from the Western Christianity, because it's all been, we thought we had to understand rather than the issue of experiencing. So the Antiochian Archdiocese has been very good about developing materials for people to acquaint them with Orthodoxy. Ancient Faith Radio, Ancient Faith Ministries, it used to be called Conciliar Press. That's brought lots of people to the church, or at least to be inquiring. One of the things that the Ancient Faith Ministry director told me recently, she said that she's a Korea. She said that as soon as they make contact with us, we want that you have to go experience it. You can't just read about it. You can't just listen to us talking about it. You need to go worship. And so they encourage them to go to the nearest Orthodox church. and this is a little bit more about monasticism. He says, do not confuse monasticism as an institution with asceticism. We are all called to be ascetic, but not all are in the monastery. You do not have to leave your home to be ascetic, to get rid of passions, to pray, to fast, to be charitable, to love each other. Monks are simply some lay people who have started to live in eternity today, which is an extraordinary thing. It's a beautiful observation. This is a painting of Valerio Gafenko when he was dying. So I just put this beside this. But one of the things that Father Roman struggled with his whole life was the intellectual. He was, before he was arrested, he was a PhD student in the spirituality with Saint Dimitri Staniloy, Jane mentioned. But then he had grown up at one of the more famous monasteries in Romania, Cernica Monastery, where there were just simple monks, and they were always reciting the Jesus prayer. And he didn't realize. In fact, he went back and visited them after he had gone to all the lectures on the burning bush movement and discussions, and he realized that they were practicing it, and he told them about it, and he said, "Isn't that the simple monks were saying? Isn't that an amazing thing? They're having lectures about prayer." Whereas, and it was just their life. I mean, they were continually doing it, but they had there was a one monk who was mute, who couldn't speak, and the other monk, the other monk's obedience was to care for this very sick, very dependent monk, and he said it was such a beautiful relationship of caring. He said he remembered how the paralyzed monk was shining and smelled very good because he was offered loving care by the other monk. I mean, what could be better than that one witness of Christian love? You know, it speaks way beyond the intellectual kinds of things that we often say academically. One of the other things I'm going to skip this because I want to have a little bit of time for questions, but I'll just say that Father Roman emphasized, and this is very hard for us again in the West, that we really live in our when we are in Holy Week, in the Great Week, we are reliving the Passion. We're living it. It's not remembering in some kind of symbolic sense. It's a very real. We're there on Holy Thursday with the crowd shouting, "Crucify him, crucify him." We're there at the foot of the cross, and this is something that is very difficult, I think, for many coming out of the Western Christianity to appreciate that fully. So this is what Father Roman had to say about prayer after his experience in the prison. What a tragedy not to be able to sit down for 2 hours without saying anything. When you do, maybe God will have something to say to you. What a tragedy it is that we cannot face God in ourselves. By facing God and having an encounter with him, you know who you are. We are nothing without him. He is the seal of our personality. And this second point here, he said, was something that kept him alive. I mean, pronounce the name of Jesus, for at his name every knee shall bow. The demons tremble at hearing it. Lord Jesus Christ is enough. So you call him, he's with us. I mean, pray for those who are your enemies. In the end, you will love them. It's what happened to me. So Saint Sophian, who came to Lebanon and did restored iconography here in this country. This is from a painting that he restored, I think, during the communist time. It's at Antime Monastery, which is where the burning bush movement met in Bucharest, in Romania. There's an arrow there. I don't know if it projects very well, but Saint Sophion had a sense of humor. And he was also trying to sort of move something around behind the communists. But there are many people there at the Dormition of the Theotokos in this icon. And the arrow is pointed to a young man, and that's Roman Braga. And there are other figures in the burning bush movement that were also on the other side of the icon that are identifiable. But so Father Sophion, or Saint Sophion, was sort of his protest about what the communists were trying to do. And so this is some more on about the spiritual life. This is Father Roman when he was fairly new to America, coming from Brazil. We are now spreading Orthodoxy in America in a formal way. We should go further, though, and move also on the vertical dimension. He liked to talk about the two dimensions, the horizontal dimension of the cross and the vertical dimension. And teach by our own example, by our liturgy and work at developing an Orthodox spirituality. Spirituality does not come just because we know church history and dogma. Orthodoxy is not a philosophy. We live our faith. So again, it's experiential. That's why we were embodied souls. I mean, we are physical, and our physical being has to be saved. I mean, that was what's so extraordinary at the beginning of Great Lent, to go up and venerate all of the relics at the monastery yesterday. It was very moving to be part of that. And then this is what Father Roman said when he was in solitary confinement at one point. He had a prayer where it was like a turning point in his life. He said, Lord, you who created man according to your image and want him to be like you, take me into your hands and work on me as is your own will. I mean, that was as he was going into all of this horrible torture and it sustained him. There is still in man's soul a patch of paradise, a spot of light, and until the restoration of man to his proper place, there will be no peace in the universe. And of course, we see that now. I mean, the world is even getting crazier. Christ reflects himself in the hearts of each individual in a specific way. That is the whole beauty we find in this world, and no power on earth will destroy it. Now, I want to speak a little bit about the last 2 years of Father Roman's life, where Jane and I got to know him much better. I was with him when he died, and I have never, I think, been at any more peaceful a death than his. I mean, he had, are you familiar with post-traumatic stress disorder? PTSD? I mean, people have nightmares, they can have horrible moments when they're even awake, where these memories come back and torture them. He had that earlier, I mean, many years earlier, decades earlier, but he died completely healed of this. I have taken care of many military veterans where their PTSD symptoms got worse as they came closer to death. It was just the reverse with Father Roman. So we would go and see him at the end of liturgy every Sunday. We would sit with him and ask him, how are you, Father? And he would very patiently say, again, he'd say this almost every Sunday, I'm waiting. He's waiting for God, waiting on God. And then about 2 weeks, or about the time of his birthday is in early April, and he died in late April. At the time of his birthday, the nuns who were taking care of him said, well, they were about ready to say, God grant you many years, or sing God grant you many years, and so on. And he said, don't do that. Don't pray for my health. I'm at the end. Pray for my salvation. And then as I was caring for him, it's amazing to think of someone who was 93 years old he was so disciplined, he would always get up for the midnight office. I would help him to get up and do his prayers. And I could never imagine myself ever being this disciplined, but he did it joyfully. But at one point he was too weak to do it. And he said, I can't, and he just accepted. He said, I can't use my legs anymore, so I must rely more on God. And then it got so difficult that he couldn't follow his usual rule of prayer. So I just can't do it. God must take over. The last words I heard him say were, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on sin. And then he also made this comment. He said that man is a great emptiness that only God can fill. So he was being kenotically stripped of everything and completely filled with God. He did a lot of, he was a very gifted chanter when he was young. And he did a lot of work revising liturgical documents. And the bishop was going to give him a medal for it. And he's already in a wheelchair. I mean, this is very close to his death. And the bishop put it on him. The bishop turned around. He immediately pulled it off. He didn't want any kind of awards, or he's a very humble man. I'll end with this quote, because I think this is so powerful about theosis or deification. There is nostalgia in our soul for God. We are looking for God. Because we lost paradise, there is nostalgia for paradise. God is like the magnet that attracts us. God reflects himself in the heart of each individual in a specific way, and we have to embrace that specific way. We are not robots of the state, created to move to the right or to the left on demand. God is the prototype, and we are the icon, the image. The image wants to reach the prototype. This growing in God and in knowledge of God will be infinite. Thank you. Any questions? I know these are, I had a lot of quotations and Father Roman would be saying you're made up of too many quotations. But thank you.
Actually, there are too many questions, but I just will ask only one. You mentioned his saying, his quotation about if you don't suffer, you cannot forgive. Can we speak, can you enlighten this according to his experience? What is the relationship between suffering and forgiveness? Because now we started, yesterday, and now we start the Forgiveness Sunday or this whole period of fasting. What's the relationship? What can be?
I think my understanding of this is that we are, he kept saying our faith is not an intellectual thing. It's an experience of the whole person. And so our suffering, of course, involves our physical, psychological, social, and spiritual dimensions. And so he was putting it in the context of remembering physically being beaten, tortured, sleep deprived, starved. All of these kinds of events were affecting what he meant by that suffering. So it was a very real, tangible, you can hold on to it kind of suffering, not oh, I'm unhappy. My life is not what I would like it to be. So he was putting it in that context, and it was always in relation to other people who had maybe his friends who had betrayed him, or so those relationships. So if in that kind of, if there was an opportunity to freely, it was always emulating Christ. So if there was an opportunity in that suffering to say, Father, or forgive them, they don't understand what they're doing, to let Christ speak through you in your suffering and accept it, then it becomes transformative. And he wanted to make this distinction between being annoyed. Maybe somebody said something that was annoying to you, or maybe they were late with some assignment or some project, or they didn't. I don't know. Maybe they stepped on your foot, literally. Those things are annoying, but if somebody has done something really dreadful to you, maybe even tried to kill you, tried to destroy you, and then you can, then what else? The only thing you can do is either forgive or you hate forever, and then they win. The evil wins, and so this is I think what he was speaking to. But he it was an extraordinary sense of not only. I think there was part of what he was saying also was that in this kind of, maybe it was only for saints, I don't know, but in his own experience, I think he could forgive not only whatever had been done to him, but he was in a sense participating in the kind of forgiveness of God for a whole people. That the communists were really ultimately destroying themselves. It was this terrible evil.
Yeah, if I may, I have a thought that if you have a little suffering, you may not recognize the danger of the black dots in your heart.
Yeah.
But if you have severe suffering, then you feel the darkness in your heart, and then you feel the danger. You lose your salvation. Then you may, turn to prayer and ask God to and pray for your enemies. And probably this would, what he meant.
Yeah, and I think one of the things when he was in prison, when he was saying intensely the Jesus prayer, and he said he had to go inside into the inner universe. He talked about the interior, the heart. That I quoted. He said that it was a dark place, but that's the same place where Christ descended. He descended into Hades, into each of our hell, to find us there. So in the very darkest place is where he finds God. This is this extraordinary thing. It's hard. It's doesn't make logical sense, but experientially, when you witness his life and what he has to say from that experience, it has to be true. Yeah, he was.
Thank you, Doctor. This was very interesting lecture I learned a lot. But I had a question on his comments on politics, saying Christianity is incompatible with politics. And that may be true, but what do you do when politics is trying to kill you? Right? How do you avoid politics when politics doesn't avoid you? So what do you think Father Romanoff would have said to such a question?
I think I'll quote something that my spiritual father, who was his spiritual child as well, Father John Conkle, said, and I think it was probably something he may have learned also from Father Roman, and that is that Father Roman, by the way, I didn't quote this, but he told me privately, he said that there's a time when there will be great persecution of Christians in America. He was concerned that it might come through Islam. He saw that as a growing threat in America, not so that's something to keep in mind. But so if you look at any political science textbook, politics is defined as power. Aristotle described or defined politics as living in community, much closer to what the Christian understanding of what politics would be. So the whole issue of why there can't be a Christian politics is I think, because of this sense that politics is about acquisition, retention, and the extension of power, and that isn't the humble God that became a human being that's described in Philippians chapter 2, where he emptied himself. That's just the opposite. That's demonic. So that's the danger, I think, of conflating Christian politics with it. But I think what Father John Conkle, who I think was speaking probably also may have had these conversations with Father Roman, is that if you're a parent, if you have children, you have a wife, or if there's a family involved, you may have to flee. You may have to go to the hills, to protect your children and let them, to help them. But he said, if you're alone, if it's just you might have to be a martyr. I mean, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. I mean, this isn't something to be. I think Father Roman wouldn't say that this is a thing to be completely depressed about. This God has not abandoned us. I mean, but at some point the church really grew under persecution, and we know from the whole tradition of the church that at the end, there always will be tribulation, but I'm always with you. I mean, so this sense of God being more manifest, a greater theophany, will come in our suffering, our suffering together. We have to support each other.
Thank you again for your talk. I'm wondering how Father Roman approached dialogue with other churches. I know in your book you mentioned that he speaks about the unity of the churches being achieved through beatings, and it seems like there's a slightly different understanding of theology coming from all of the ascetics who entered the prisons versus people like Father Cleopa who entered the hermitage out in the hills. So, and especially going to America after being in Romania, which is such a monoculture of Orthodoxy, and then being in Michigan, where you have 40 different denominations within 10 minutes of the monastery. I don't know what that looked like for him. So thank you.
Well, one of the things he was very disappointed with when he came to America and he was now referring to the Romanian culture, the diaspora culture, the danger of the diaspora culture, and that could be not just true of Romanians, but is why are they there, and are they there as refugees from being their lives threatened and so on? Maybe to a certain extent, but he wasn't worried about the church being assimilated in some ways, but he was worried about people assimilating to American culture and and forgetting the church. We want our children to be successful. We want them to get into a good university. We want them to have a good salary. And oh, by the way, we come to church to see other people that we can speak, that we know, and it becomes a cultural association, a club. And so that, I think, is part of the potential danger. When he was in Brazil, and I wish I had more material on this, but the material I did have was, Jane and I found, was very interesting already. The patriarch, the Metropolitan of Sao Paulo, the Antiochian Metropolitan, he was taking many different Orthodox groups under his wings, and he said, well, I have all these Romanian people who have come, and you can help them, serve under me, and I will. Now, already within a generation, there were mixed marriages, so they were marrying Catholic, had a Catholic spouse, and so the families were mixed, and he was trying to work through this to get them into church first of all, and to hopefully make the whole family Orthodox. But there was some economia, I think he was exercising with the blessing of the bishop to do that. And so there's that aspect of it too. It was right at the time, of course, the Vatican II reforms had been enacted, and there were great frustration on the part of some of the faithful of the Catholic faithful, because some of their major saints, they revered Saint Christopher, for example. Well, the Catholics decided Saint Christopher was a legend. And so there was a lot of turmoil, and he talked about this. I mean, it's a very, yeah, I better stop. But anyway, there's a lot more we could talk about with the.
I just wanted to remind you, if anyone wants to read more about his life, you do have a copy in your library here. Now it's in English. If you're more comfortable reading Greek, Vatopedi Press is going to be releasing a copy in modern Greek shortly, before Pascha, they said. So it's being published right now. It's translated.
The translation has been complete.
Yeah, it's coming out. So there will be in those two languages. Romanian, probably none of you read. So that is, but anyway, it is available if you want to know more about Father Roman.
Thank you very much. Me personally, I would like more, but it is the time that.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It was very great. Thank you very much. I think you gave us many things to think about, especially for me about forgiveness. بعتقد الدكتور عطانا تعبته ما بعرف، بس مشان هيك رح سكر، خلاص رح سكر تمي. بس بعتقد عطانا شوية أفكار كتير حلوة حتى مشان هلا الغفران، والأقوال اللي حطها أنا رح حاول إنه حتى نترجمها للعربي، وما هيدي كل السلايدات اللي حطها البرزيدنت كله نترجمها للعربي، مشان أنا بعتقد فيه كتير كان أفكار حلوة. طيب يعطيكم ألف عافية. 11:30 الصلاة، بركي منرتل بس يا رب القوات قبل ما نمشي. We'll just a little chant and then we leave. Thank you very much. Really. Yeah.